Welcome to the August 15th meeting of the Wheat Ridge Planning Commission. Tonight's Planning Commission meeting is being held in person and online. Commissioners, Planning Department staff, and members of the public are attending in the Wheat Ridge City Hall and also by way of the Zoom platform. Members of the public who are not present and wish to make a comment may participate virtually by joining through Zoom, either on a device or by calling in. A Zoom meeting link and dial-in information can be found on wheatridgespeaks.org. In addition to being online via Zoom, we are also broadcasting this meeting on Channel 8 and wheatridgespeaks.org. Public comment will occur at the beginning of the meeting. This is, we do not have any changes to vote on tonight. This is a study session, but the public will be able to speak for 3 minutes. You may speak on any topic, or you may speak on the Lutheran Legacy Campus. If you plan to speak online tonight, please keep background noise to a minimum. If you do not plan to speak, we recommend you simply view the meeting live by watching on Channel 8 or on wheatridgespeaks.org. We appreciate your participation in tonight's meeting, and we hope to create a friendly and respectful atmosphere for public dialogue, and we appreciate your help in this process. May I please get a roll call of the members?
Jonathan Shelkey.
Here.
Krista Hollab.
Here.
Christine Disney.
Here.
Danielle Gravy.
Here.
Patrick Quinn.
Here.
Will Kearns.
Here.
Michael Moore.
Here.
Sierra Kionis.
Here. The next order on the agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please stand and join me in the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Next on the agenda is approving the order of our agenda. Does anyone have any changes to the agenda? Seeing none, the agenda will stand as published. Next, we'll approve the minutes from our last meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? I have one change. On the very last page, under Commissioner Updates, on the first line, it should be First Friday. It just says first, so that, just for clarification. Is there any other corrections to the minutes? Is there a motion to approve the minutes from August 1st?
Motion to approve the minutes as amended. Second.
All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed?
Motion approved, 8-0. Sorry, motion approved 7-0 with 1 abstaining.
We'll now open the general interest public forum. This is the time for any person to speak on any subject appearing on the agenda or not on the agenda for tonight. If you plan to speak on an item that is on the agenda, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. Those who wish to comment on our Zoom connection, use the raise your hand button. If you are dialing in, press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute your phone. Is there anyone signed up to speak? Is there anyone from the public online? No. All right. Thank you. I will close the public forum. And the first item on our agenda then would be new business, and that would be the Lutheran Legacy Campus. May I have a presentation from staff?
test it out, Jana. Nothing? Okay, that works.
All right. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the commission. Tonight, Scott Cutler, Senior Planner, and I, Jana Easley, Planning Manager, are going to go over the Lutheran Legacy Campus zoning framework as well as the charter amendment that will be proposed in the fall. And so to start off, we know that we gave you a lot to preview and digest in the packet. And so tonight we're going to keep our presentation pretty high level and focus more on the big takeaways. I'm going to share where we're at in the process and how we're translating the master plan to the zoning regulations and give an update on the potential ballot question to modify the charter related to the building height of the campus. And then following my short presentation, Scott will hit on some of the key topics for tonight. And then following the presentation, we'll open it up for discussion and questions. Okay. Okay. I need to click the slide. All right. So under the recent history, we'll give you an abbreviated history for the purposes of tonight. And if our viewing audience is new to the project, we have more background on whatsupwheatridge.com. A full history of the events related to the Lutheran Legacy Campus is provided in the staff memo, including city council action and public engagement. So as a reminder, our planning work on the Lutheran Legacy Campus dates back almost 4 years, and the city has a history of being proactive about this important property. In 2020, we asked the hospital not to sell the campus until we had a chance to make a community-created plan. And so that public planning process took place in 2021, and council adopted the master plan that year. Fast forward to this year, and the Legacy Campus is back on our front burner for a couple of reasons. The hospital ownership decided that they were ready to sell the property, and the hospital moved on August 3rd. In a study session in April, we discussed the pros and cons of the city taking a proactive approach on both a charter amendment and a zone change, both of which are required to convert the master plan vision into reality. You can see here 3 reasons why we're moving forward with a city-initiated zone change at this stage. First, this approach allows for a very public conversation. It's allowed us to talk about the Legacy Campus at several public events through the spring and summer, and to have this study session tonight. We could not have those conversations if we were reviewing this in a developer-led proposal because it would be quasi-judicial. Second, no one knows this master plan better than this community, this council, this planning commission, and our staff. Instead of waiting for a developer to interpret the plan, we are best able to align the zoning regulations with the community's vision, and we hope that you recognized that alignment in the documents that you reviewed tonight. Third, we're concerned about now that the hospital is moved, that the campus could sit underutilized for some period of time. This campus is too central and too important to sit vacant and wait for investment and potentially become an eyesore or attractive nuisance. A proactive rezoning may help to shorten that period of time. It could be a matter of months and years instead of years and decades, such as with Clear Creek Crossing. So to that end, we wanted to share with you tonight how we're translating the master plan into zoning regulations. Lastly, we know that implementation of the master plan's vision requires the city charter to be amended to modify the building height limitations in the interior of the campus to maintain economic feasibility of development. On August 5th, City Council gave consensus to proceed with a ballot question modifying the building height requirements for the campus, which will be discussed later in this presentation. Okay, so what's playing out between the Legacy campus is really the textbook relationship between planning and zoning. The community has articulated a vision of the future, which council has adopted. Zoning is the set of rules that explains what you can do with a property and what it can look like, and we are here at this point. We are actively translating that vision into zoning regulations, and those rules will then result in the built environment we originally envisioned with the Legacy campus plan. The city is not buying the campus, so it will also take time and money and a new property owner. But in theory, this is a fairly linear process, and we should be able to connect the dots between the community's vision and the buildings and open space we will see constructed over the next 5 to 10 years. Let's talk about trade-offs. The master plan describes key expectations which represent the central trade-off associated with future development. Number one, protect the perimeter. In a minute, Scott's going to describe the rules that we're proposing to this end. Number two, integrate existing assets. We've proposed zoning regulations related to the chapel, the Blue House, and even the existing tree canopy. And then number three, we can afford more flexibility in the middle of the site in terms of use and height. In other words, if we push buildings in and up, we can achieve those lower densities and the open space amenities that the community wants to see on the edges. This expectation helps to inform the charter amendment question. So, as some of you may know, the current hospital is 91 feet tall. You also should know that the city charter limits structures to 35 feet for residential and 50 feet for commercial or non-residential. So fundamentally, the master plan calls for heights to be tapered, taller in the middle so that they can be shorter at the edges. A ballot question and charter amendment will be needed to allow that. Based on the public polling from May and July and our additional outreach over the summer, we think that we need to be pretty specific if we amend the charter, not simply to exempt this area from the charter's height cap, but to tell people specifically what height would be allowed. Throughout the summer, we've talked about the maximum height being less than that of the hospital. On August 5th, City Council gave consensus to proceed with a ballot question limiting development in the middle of the campus to 5 stories, which would equate to approximately 70 feet. And this consensus was based on a more informed discussion about height and results from the second round of public polling and feedback from potential buyers of the property. Limiting 5 stories not only had more public support, but it also is the maximum height that most potential developers would ever plan to build. Buildings past 5 stories make little economic sense in Wheat Ridge for a few reasons. So the important takeaways for today is that the zoning will require heights to be tapered, like you see in this image, taller in the middle and shorter as you go outside of the wishbone and toward the edges. The zoning will match the charter question and allows 5 stories or 70 feet in the middle of the campus with a lower height around the perimeter of the campus, down from our existing allowed 35 feet, which would be the equivalent of 3 stories, to 30 feet and limiting the height of residential around the perimeter to 2.5 stories. This will be more in line with the adjacent neighborhoods, which was one of the key concepts in the master plan. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Scott, and he is going to talk a little bit more in detail about some of the zoning framework that we're looking at. Thanks.
Thanks, Jana. So the master plan calls for buffer and transitions between the campus and the existing adjacent neighborhoods And in order to ensure that that perimeter really is a buffer and a transition zone, we're instituting what's called a low density overlay, which would be around the perimeter of the site adjacent to the existing low density neighborhoods. So that includes Dudley Street and then the east side as well. It would apply to the first row of development within the campus and will ensure compatibility of land uses and form. Although the city code currently would allow a 35-foot height limit for residential, we're actually proposing a shorter height limit of 2.5 stories and 30 feet within this overlay in order to be more compatible with existing conditions. The allowed uses within this low-density overlay would only be single-unit homes, duplexes, and open space, and that's consistent with what's in the master plan. This ensures that medium-density uses such as townhomes do not immediately border the existing neighborhoods, and that heights are lower. Lastly, this overlay would also require pitched roofs to ensure that large, flat-roofed buildings cannot be built in this area. The master plan and community feedback was also very clear about ensuring that the 38th Avenue frontage maintained buffers and setbacks from the low-density residential neighborhoods across the street to the north. Although this frontage is included within the proposed exempted area allowing up to 5-story buildings, that does not mean that we want or are going to allow a wall of 5-story buildings right behind the sidewalk on 38th Avenue. To make sure this doesn't happen, we're including additional setback and step back requirements to ensure that the taller the building height, up to 5 stories, the larger the building setback would have to be. This will reduce visual impacts across 38th Avenue and ensure a 5-story building is not built right up to the sidewalk. The existing hospital, even though it's 7 stories and 91 feet tall, is set back significantly from the street, and new buildings would need to follow the same pattern. And so just to look at the screen, it's probably a little hard to see. These are draft images, but for example, the setback would have to equal the height of the building. So if it was a 5-story building, the setback from the sidewalk on 38th would also have to be approximately 60 to 70 feet. Someone could also do a step back where you have the building a little bit closer to the street and that portion is set back that height, and then the upper stories are stepped back further. Again, this will ensure that there's a buffer of open space along 38th Avenue, buildings aren't right on the street, and will prevent some of those concerns about icing or crowding that the plan discussed. So open space. The master plan contained a lot of guidance on open space and landscaping, including providing a range of amenities throughout the campus. The zoning requirements will include a regional approach to open space, meaning that open space is aggregated throughout each zone and a range of public amenities throughout will be required. This will include the requirement for public open space directly on Dudley Street with bicycle and pedestrian connections into the campus, such as a pocket park. Taking a regional approach also means looking at stormwater from a regional perspective, with enhanced design requirements integrating natural features instead of having each individual building construct a concrete water detention pond. Coordination will also be required with the Rocky Mountain Ditch Company, with the goal being to retain a trail alongside or adjacent to the ditch. Ultimately, the ditch company controls what happens within their easement, but we would like to see something, whether within the easement or just outside of it. And lastly, open space or parks and plazas will need to be dispersed throughout the site. And those are just some examples from the master plan. Existing assets. The master plan laid out a lot of requirements that can be more easily translated into zoning, but one of the topics where there wasn't actually as specific of direction was related to the existing assets in terms of direct requirements. One of those topics is related to the preservation of existing buildings identified as having historic value. Blue House, Chapel, and Tuberculosis Tent were all identified through the master planning process, and council passed a resolution in 2022 requesting that a future buyer demonstrate a good faith effort exploring meaningful preservation, rehabilitation, and/or reuse of the buildings. There's sustained community desire and support for preserving the buildings in some form, and honestly, the master plan may not have gone far enough in that aspect. Because of this, staff will require that as part of the concept plan application, which is the first phase of development review, early in the development process, the developer must provide justification as to how they intend to comply with the intent of the master plan and the council resolution to preserve, rehabilitate, or reuse the buildings. An approval of that concept plan would then bind the developer to that commitment. Future site plan approvals would then need to show how the structures are being rehabbed or incorporated into new development. This is the city's way of ensuring that those assets are addressed in some way, because currently they are not officially designated on local, state, or national historic registers. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jana to go over next steps. And there were a lot more details not covered in this presentation that were included in the staff memo. So at the end, feel free to ask about those details as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, so as far as next steps are concerned, Intermountain Health is currently reviewing offers from potential buyers for the site and will be selecting one soon, very soon. The purchase contract will likely be contingent upon the successful rezoning and charter amendment. City staff are currently drafting customized mixed-use regulations to reflect the vision of the master plan and ballot languages due to the county in early September. Council will decide on the final ballot language on August 26th. An official neighborhood meeting for the rezoning will be held on September 17th, along with, at the same time, the Let's Talk Open House at the Rec Center. And if the charter amendment passes in November, the mixed-use zoning regulations will be considered by you all, Planning Commission, in early December and by Council in January. If those regulations are approved, the rezoning for the hospital campus will be heard by the Planning Commission and City Council soon after. So that's all we have. Thank you. And Scott and I will now open it up for questions.
Let's start with Commissioner Gravy.
Okay, I just have a couple of notes that I made when reading through our packet. First of which is just some clarification on page 2 of our packet when it has kind of the first color-coded map, and it discusses this, and I forget which zone, I guess it would be part of zone 4, but this light purple area, yeah, it says not meant to be as dense as the darker purple areas. And so, and maybe that's described further on. I was trying to see if I got ahead of myself with that question, but my understanding was there's just kind of two. There's the low density barrier, and then there's the purple area. So is there a different actual designation of height and size in that little light purple area?
Yes, there still would be. So the low density overlay is just the first row of development, but each zone, if you go to the next page, so there's zones 1, 2, 3, and 4, would actually have different permitted uses within each zone.
Okay.
And so we anticipate the uses allowed within zone 4 outside of the low density overlay to still be less intensive than within zones 2 and 3. So for example, that zone's probably not appropriate for commercial.
Yeah.
And we haven't looked specifically at height or density in that area as much, but likely less intensive, just given its location and being outside of the central core of the campus.
Right. Have there been any more in-depth conversations about any potential transit connections within the site, or is that all going to be, I mean, I know that there's bike and pedestrian considerations, and it's probably unlikely at this time that there would be any understanding of any transit connections, but has there been anything else in terms of the design that would allow transit to go through there?
I think a lot of that will depend on throughout the process. We always work with RTD on all of these. I think there's a bus stop, but as far as bringing visitors into the site, I think it might be determined on the basis of what type of development is in there. For example, I worked on a project up in Lafayette where we worked with RTD up there to bring, because of the type of housing, it was a pretty dense, not super dense, but pretty dense, like medium density or so. development that was affordable housing, and it had some senior affordable and stuff like that. And so they had a couple different of bus routes that were coming through there, but it really didn't play out until we knew exactly what type of development is going to be in there, because they want to, their goal is to increase ridership, not to send a bus through that's not going to have riders on it. And so that'll be part of our process as we work through probably the concept plan.
Yeah, I don't think we want to rule anything out at this point. RTD, RTD just committed to bus service at Clear Creek Crossing, and that project has been 6+ years in the making. So sometimes it kind of takes something to actually get built before they commit additional service or access onto the site.
Yeah, because I was thinking of that in this same vein as there was mention here briefly of whether it will become a throughway for traffic. And I imagine those two desires could conflict if you allow transit through, but I know that there's consideration to try to prevent too much traffic used to connect 32nd and 38th. So I don't know if you want to speak to whether that is just as the roads that we see as they're designed, if that's what would prevent that from happening, or if there's other steps, traffic calming or something that would potentially be put in place.
I think ultimately we'd be looking at this for a walkable community, right? I mean, if it's going to have a lot of residential and some neighborhood retail or restaurants or something like that in there. But it's also important to, the bus fits into that at Clear Creek Crossing too. We're working on a Paseo design, the developer is, and there will still be bus and traffic probably coming through there, but slowing it down, we've got a lot of ways that we can help facilitate that, I think. And if you're looking for a walkable community, I think those things go hand in hand. So we, of course, don't know. I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I'd love it. But at this point, I would say that based upon what we've heard for interest in the site, it would probably be a more walkable area, which would in and of itself discourage a lot of cut-through traffic. Because, naturally you slow down when there's more people around.
Absolutely. Do you know, has there been any indication that, has Intermountain Health expressed an alignment with these overall principles, or is that not, because they're choosing the developer, or they're choosing the sale, the buyer. And so just out of curiosity, have they weighed in on the process at all, or is that?
They have a commercial broker helping them through the process. I'm not sure how involved they are. I couldn't speak on that.
The last question I had was just out of curiosity, and I really appreciate the way that it's panned out in terms of recognizing the community input and setting those 30-foot and the 5-story cap, the 70-foot, because I know that you had indicated back when we had initially talked about this, how it would be, more likely to be closer to the hospital height, but the fact that it's lower, I think will probably make it more agreeable to certain community members who are hesitant about development. But I am curious, because when you said that maybe it's just for this site specifically, but that there's less development interest in building something over 5 stories, when at the same time we had a meeting a few weeks ago where at Ward Transit, they're building 6 or 8-story buildings. And so, clearly there are taller buildings being built in Wheat Ridge when the exemption is in place. So just curious why those are different.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. We don't know exactly what that developer is going to do. We have several apartment buildings in exempted areas that could go higher than 5 stories and haven't, because after 5 stories, construction types change and it becomes substantially more expensive to build a building over 5 stories until you get to like 9 or 10. And then the economics make sense again. So when you allow that kind of middle, it's unlikely that someone would want to proceed with that unless there was major commercial component, or funding is just not that realistic, I think. We haven't seen anything over 5 stories in Wheat Ridge.
Oh, really? So the Ward Street area that we approved that zoning change, weren't there buildings at 6 stories right now? And then or there was one that potentially was going to be 8. Am I remembering that correctly? And
Yeah, so the zoning would allow 6 stories or 8 stories there, but that doesn't necessarily mean they would build it. The other property at that site that is zoned for 8 stories only built at 5.
oh, so the existing buildings at Ward Transit are only 5?
Correct.
Oh, okay. I thought there were 6. Okay, thanks.
And for reference, I believe they're 64 feet tall. So,
Commissioner Quinones?
Good evening. I have a couple of questions. Right here on my phone. I think you addressed one of them in that it seems that once we're good with the rezoning, it's really up to the developer to determine whether it's going to be mixed use or not within the high density area, correct?
Yeah, so are you talking specifically like the central
Correct.
zones 2 and 3?
Yeah.
Yes, so we want to make sure that those uses are allowed, like having the potential for civic use or commercial. We don't want to prescribe a specific number or square footage to that type of use, but require that there is something besides residential included in both those zones.
Oh, so that can actually be required without getting specific with what it is?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah, so we could just say, they have to provide commercial, civic, or something. We haven't gotten into the fine-grained details yet, but yeah, we could require that it's not just residential. They could have to provide, I don't know, a kiosk use for commercial or retail space, civic space, things like that.
yeah, and when, we don't want to prescribe a hard number because that's when you're really just making people try to do something that they don't think is feasible or really isn't feasible. So, if that number's 10% or 5% or something like that, whatever works out for the best design overall and uses that are correlative. So if a large chunk becomes a civic center, for example, maybe that would lend itself to more restaurant space nearby, So it's sort of a trade-off.
Thank you. The other question I had, which I wasn't very clear on, and I know that you tried to address this, on the multi-model, which is what area is this, what zone? It's a light purple one. So is that going to be available for mixed use as well?
I don't know if we've gotten that far. That's what the plan says, but we
Okay.
know that it's less intensive than the center part of the campus. So that's the area where it said, maybe less dense or less intensive commercial development. Maybe that's a restaurant probably wouldn't be appropriate in that area, for example, because that's kind of a higher traffic use. I don't think we've gotten as far as to decide what exact list of uses are in each zone, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think we're looking at the overall site as the mix of uses. And yeah, you're probably not going to have some retail that nobody's going to ever find, but you might have some office space or something like that in that area.
Perfect. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Kearns?
My question revolves around the hospital. Is the hospital's height grandfathered in? Do we get to keep it at 90 feet? Are plans to demolish the hospital, or would the hospital be a candidate for adaptive reuse?
We're not sure yet. Yes, it is grandfathered in. The hospital has been there longer than we've been incorporated, so it's just naturally grandfathered in. That it can remain, and we don't know how the site will work out for adaptive reuse. It may be that some of the newer towers are successfully reused, but it's a somewhat difficult building because of the systems and mechanical and that sort of thing in place for reuse. So that will be something that'll be investigated.
Commissioner Shelkey?
Yeah, I have a question on page 9, in that first paragraph under parking requirements. So it says about, to reducing vehicle trips by creating a comfortable walking/biking environment. What does that mean?
I think the intent there is we want to have a street network and a network of paths within the development where you don't necessarily, if you're on foot or on a bike, have to mix with vehicles. So kind of creating a separate pedestrian network. And if people live on the campus, that they could be able to comfortably walk to any civic or potential commercial uses within or outside as well.
Okay. Then the next paragraph talks about if a study indicates that infrastructure improvements are required, the developer will be responsible for constructing those improvements. Could that include something like protected bike lanes on the roads that go through?
I think it's kind of open to anything.
Okay.
City right-of-way, 38th Avenue, 32nd Avenue, that's probably more of a challenge, but it's more of a blank slate within the campus in terms of how they want to address that requirement.
There's two roads basically through, right?
Correct.
Through the campus. So that would be a possibility that they would look at that in order to have, as they say, a comfortable walking and biking environment, that could be part of it. Maybe protected bike lanes, which would be a first for Wheat Ridge.
Well, and interestingly, those internal streets are private. So they would be a part of the purchase, essentially.
So it would go back to the developer then.
It would, but that's why we are proactively working on a framework for the zoning that would include these things that we would like to see, that the community wanted to see in that legacy plan.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Commissioner Holland?
Thank you. So just to put a really fine point on this light purple area, is the next step up then up to 35 feet regardless of what it's zoned as? Is that sort of the next step from 30 to 35 or?
Yes. So there would actually kind of be three different heights allowed on the campus. There's the low density overlay, which would actually be dropped to 30 feet or 2.5. Then kind of the rest of the yellow portions on the map would be that 35 foot. And then the 50 would be the purple areas, including the light purple. But like I said earlier, that light purple is probably still going to be less intensive in terms of the allowed building forms. So maybe smaller buildings and less intensive commercial uses.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful just to have a number. On page 10, we talk about open space. Just a few questions here. Would this open space then be private since the entire development is private, or would that be public open space?
So there is probably going to be a mix of both. If you have a house, it'll have its own private backyard. Same with maybe an apartment building might have its own private roof area or something like that. But the intent is that a lot of this open space will be publicly accessible and required. I know in some developments we have required public access easements across these so that they are continually maintained by the whatever property association and kind of continue to be public assets in the long run. That's how we're operating at Clear Creek Crossing, where, for example, the trailhead structure that's being built there is put in a tract that's a publicly owned tract by the Metro District that will be maintained in perpetuity as a parkland. So it will be a mix of both, but I think the intent is a lot of it is going to be this kind of public trail network.
Great for connectivity. And on the last bullet under that first key concepts, the EG says detention. I'm not familiar with what open space detention is.
Oh yeah, stormwater.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect. There's not preservation included in there. Was that considered and rejected or just never considered it given the development site?
What type of preservation are you asking about?
Like, not just open space, but like environmental preservation. So like like wild prairie, for example.
Well, I don't think, is there any wild prairie on it now? I'm not sure if there is, but there is an existing tree canopy, and that's one thing that we're going to strongly encourage be preserved as practicable. Sometimes you cannot preserve all of it. We also are trying to preserve some sort of a trail system along the ditch, but that's going to involve conversations with the ditch company. A lot of times when you work with ditch companies, they want you to underground it and they want you to remove all the trees within their easement, which is, 30 feet on either side of the ditch. So they can be easy to work with, medium to work with, or really, really difficult to work with. So far, I don't think that our ditch companies have been extremely difficult to work with. So I think that there's some opportunity here. But as far as, we don't have the rights to say exactly what's kept within a ditch easement, for example. So we'll do our best.
Are there any regulations on like the subdivision of this entire area? Like, let's say if the developer they choose wants to then subdivide it and sell it off in pieces.
Yeah, I can talk through that a little bit. So before that could occur, we would still require if because one developer is going to buy the property to start with, they would be required to go through the concept plan process first before they could subdivide. And the concept plan is what dictates a lot of the circulation network concepts, the open space concepts, that requirement I talked about for the historic preservation. And that's binding. So once that occurs, a future developer could then potentially purchase a portion of the property, but they would have to develop that under the approved concept plan and under the approved zoning. So the concept plan is really that first step that they would be required to go through before it can get parceled off and that sort of thing.
Okay, thank you for that. And does this preclude a developer from, in the future, petitioning for zoning changes like they would if it wasn't?
They're always entitled to ask,
Okay.
but it would not be in line with the legacy master plan. It most likely will not be in line with the comprehensive plan. So that would be a very hard uphill battle that probably would not be successful.
Okay, thank you. All my questions.
Commissioner Moore.
Well, the problem going sixth is that three of my questions have already been covered. So thank you, everybody else. Wanted to just get clarity on setback. You had mentioned equal to or greater than the height of the building.
Yes, and that would be specific to 38th because we know that that portion is technically within the exempted area, but we still understand that the plan and residents that we've heard from don't want 5-story buildings right on the edge of 38th Avenue. So this is kind of an extra step that we're going beyond just saying, oh, you can build 5 stories there. It's an extra level of protection.
Okay. And then setbacks for the outer perimeter. You had mentioned that those may be a bit larger than they are regularly.
Yeah, so believe it or not, rear setbacks in Wheat Ridge are generally 5 feet. And we know that Allison Court is a bit lower than the campus on the east side. So we're discussing, we haven't landed on a number of larger rear setbacks for that portion. And then kind of along Dudley Street, making sure that those homes have some front yards. So again, buildings aren't right on the street.
Perfect, thank you. And then the last one I had was metro districts. Are there restrictions? Help me understand that.
No, there's no, Wheat Ridge has other metro districts. Clear Creek Crossing is a good example of that. Metro districts work really well with residential projects because it becomes more of an HOA. They're a little bit more difficult with commercial projects, but so in a case like this where maybe they need to upsize the infrastructure, like the water and sewer lines or something of course, the hospital is pretty big and they use a lot of water and sewer, I'm sure. But if they were needing to upsize those or replace them, build extra roads, things like that, that would be something that they could use a metro district for rather successfully, probably.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Bob, Commissioner Quinn.
Thank you, I think, Madam Chair. And I might be drilling down a little bit too deep than what you're presenting tonight. And Madam Chair, if I'm taking some of your thunder, kick me under the table. I have a couple of questions, like zones 1 and 4, primarily single-family residential. Are there lot sizes with this yet, or is this depending on how they replat everything? And specifically, is it going to be, are we going to have like a little sub-road that goes between the main Lutheran Parkway or whatever and whatever's on the east side, like Allison or whatever's on the west side? Because it looks like those are going to be like, if we're only having one set of lots, it looks like they're going to be way deep or something. Do you follow me?
Yeah, I don't know if we've gotten that detailed yet. That low density overlay would be only single unit homes and duplexes and limited to that 2.5 stories. And also on Dudley specifically, there's a requirement for a park. So those kind of act as buffers. We haven't gotten as specific as lot sizes yet. The overall campus is still limited to 21 dwelling units per acre. So when you factor in open space and also the potential for larger apartment buildings in the middle, those start to take away from the allowed density or number of units elsewhere. So no, we have not gotten that specific, but it's not intended to be like extraordinarily narrow homes, for example, or again, right on the sidewalk, there would still have to be front yards, things like that. But yeah, not sure about anything specific on
So
lot
it says
sizes.
21 lots per acre,
Dwelling units per acre.
dwelling units per acre.
And that's across the entire campus,
Okay.
because that's
So it
what's
wouldn't
allowed
matter
now.
if it's
Yeah.
residential or whatever, and 1 and 4, it's still 21 units per acre.
Per acre, yeah, net, yeah. So take the entire number of dwelling units divided by the total size, and that's the density we're looking at.
Okay. Next question, and again, it might be too deep. What is the difference between zone 3 and 4? I mean, we kind of had, zone 1 is primarily residential. Zone 4, you have residential and then a little bit higher soft purple in the middle there. And then it looks like 3 and 4 are kind of the same. So I guess the crazy question would be, why have a zone 3 and a zone 4 if they're going to be the same?
I think you might mean 2 and 3, but I'm
Oh, it could
not
be.
sure.
Yeah, 2 and 3. I'm sorry. I misspoke. You are correct.
I think they are really similar. I think the biggest thing is the setback from 38 that affects zone 2 is a pretty big change, whereas zone 3, you can you don't have to deal with 38th Avenue. We haven't gotten as specific on uses yet, so, maybe ultimately they become combined, but there are definitely some suitabilities that were different between 2 and 3 in the master plan. Thanks, Jana, for pulling that up.
Yeah, and if you haven't read or at least skimmed through this master plan, if you look at page 64 in it, there's some other pages around it that talk about the different levels of density. So this should provide some level of comfort because this is what we're aiming for. We're not trying to go against what the master plan is saying. We're trying to solidify what the master plan is saying. And so there are examples of, for example, middle density, and it shows there's transition areas. And this is what we talked about when we talked about the tapering of heights. So as the center where the hospital is the tallest piece, it's going to taper down. We don't know exactly what that taper is going to look like. There might be parts of the building that are 5 and parts that are 3 around the edges. But the intent of this, of what we are doing right now is really to, like I said, solidify what is in the plan. On the higher density, it shows this, whoops, it shows me because I just pressed the wrong button. Hold on one second. I lost it. I will find it again. But if you haven't looked at it, it's a long document. So I understand if you haven't read it, but if you get to the pictures at least and look through it, it does talk about transition zones and, that taller in the middle and bleeding out toward the edges. And we're even going a little bit further in lowering the height around the perimeter to the 2.5 stories, because technically those homes around the perimeter that are existing, that are already built, could pop their top and build up to 35 feet right now. But in order to help kind of the whole neighborhood feel a little bit more comfortable, and also have the existing transition a little bit more in line with what's there, that 2.5 stories really, it provides for a good-looking home that has hopefully enough room for, a growing family.
Thanks, Jana. One last thing, and I think Commissioner Hullock, we tried to answer for her, and just to clarify, how much open space is this going to have? And when you say open space, I'm thinking like Crown Hill, wild, if you will, or is this going to be more of a controlled parkish kind of a atmosphere?
We haven't gotten that prescriptive yet.
Okay.
We know the plan calls for a lot, but we also know that it calls for open space interspersed throughout. So not necessarily focusing on one massive green space, but rather multiple pocket parks, multiple types of open space. Some could be more natural, perhaps along the ditch. Some might be more like a plaza or a square that is somewhat hardscape. So I think there's a big mix. The master plan did not get that prescriptive on 10% has to be open space, or 20% or whatever. It really just talked about providing amenities throughout, and that's something that we could ensure that each zone has either a minimum percentage or has its own park or amenity space within the zone. So we still have a lot of work to do. This is just a high-level framework at this point.
I was afraid I was drilling down a little bit, but that's what we get drilled down to. So thank you very much.
So my question, Will and I are the only two that were here when we adopted this plan. And my understanding from all of the discussions and work with CZB was, did they do this, or who did our master plan? Okay. Zone 2 was going to contain the higher, at the time, apartments. And Zone 3 was going to be mixed use, like townhomes, more dense. And 4, under my understanding, was going to be more like civic. Maybe the city would move their offices in the police station there, is what I had heard. And then in the past month, I've had 3 residents come to me with their hair on fire because they think that this is all going to be 5-story or higher apartment buildings, and that the developer is going to do whatever they want, which I tried to explain, no, they can't, because there's a plan and it will be zoned to the plan. But as I read what was published on What's Up Wheat Ridge about this, and looking at this, it seems to me, and I don't know if this is the right term, there's been a little bit of scope creep in that now 2 and 3 could house 5-story apartment buildings, and the opportunity for people to buy an affordable home, such as a townhome, has been diminished because the numbers aren't coming out right, and now we have to have 5-story apartment buildings in here. And so I just need to know how to be able, because I stepped in it on Facebook, because I said, no, the only high building is going to be where the hospital is. And I was wrong, because it's changed. So could we have some clarification about that, please?
I don't think it's changed. I appreciate that input, because, like I said, this is a long plan, and I think that the final map that's shown in the purple and light purple is a culmination of all of these other kind of heat maps, if you can see that. It's kind of the heat maps that are put together in the middle of the legacy master plan document. And so in this area, it talks about middle density, and it shows some pictures of some, I would guess, 35-foot tall townhomes. And then the page before, a couple of pages before that, it shows, hold on, I'm very slow because my program isn't, my window's in the way. On the page before that, it shows some of those taller examples where you've got the 4 and 5 story. I think that this is something that's going to probably have to get worked out in the concept plan. That's the appropriate stage to work this out. We're not trying to have scope creep. I like that term though, that's very good. But what we are trying to do is allow for that mix of housing types, adhere to the plan in the low density, and even shorten it a little bit around the perimeter. And in the center, where both the dark purple and light purple, I really do believe that's a culmination of the, because some of it talks about civic, some of these heat maps, I'll call them, they talk about civic, some talk about office. And so I suppose you could have something like a 4-story building in that area. There needs to be, for it to be mixed use, there needs to be a mix of uses. And I think this is going to have to come up as part of the concept plan, but our goal is to set a zoning framework so that we have the basics to work off of, so that there are no surprises. It's predictable for both us and the developer, and faster, so the site doesn't sit there and get vandalized and such. That's our map. And so, do you guys have a copy of this in your packets? I can't remember if it was included, the whole master plan.
They don't. It was 100 pages,
I know,
so it's
like-
available on,
it's-
there's links to it in the staff
It's
report.
super long, but like it's got the civic, which we don't have any idea at this point if we can build a civic center there or if it would even be feasible. We've talked about perhaps adaptive reuse of the hospital buildings or portion of them, but the systems and mechanical in there are just massive. And so we are currently looking for I think we have one selected, but I'm not sure. We've got a architectural consultant essentially that's going to help us with the feasibility study with regard to expansion as far as a mixed, an adaptive reuse into the existing hospital, or a new building on that site, or if it's, would be better to expand City Hall somehow. We've got no solid answer on that at this point because we just don't have enough information. But they did provide in this that civic uses, and that kind of bled over the whole thing in the wishbone and outside the wishbone. The middle density kind of bleeds along the edges of the wishbone. And I think that was intentional for the simple reason it's kind of that step down along the streets. Typically it's, unless it's designed really well, it's uncomfortable to walk next to a 5-story building. A lot of these concepts are going to have to come out in the concept plan process. I'm trying to see if there are any other overlays. They have the parks and space overlay, so that would be good to look at. But again, even if you look at the parks and open space overlay, it's great. It's a lot of green, but it doesn't mean the whole thing's going to be a park, right? It's going to have areas of low density because it's a culmination of that other heat map, maybe another map, and then this map. And so it's trying to inform all of those into one map here. So I get the concern, but with the concept plan, those are things that we can talk through. And in the code writing, we can encourage that mix of housing types. I mean, that's the purpose of a mixed-use district. So.
Yeah, I'd add, we don't know that much about civic, but that doesn't mean we're not going to say this use is allowed and even encouraged at these locations. Same with apartments. We know that there's some areas within zones 2 and 3 that are more appropriate for apartments. Same with townhomes. 35 feet is actually still challenging to build a 3-story townhome. So, you know, even within the area that's exempted or potentially exempted up to 70 feet, it's really hard to fit a standard 3-story townhome even within 35 feet. So if they were able to go to 37 feet, honestly, that does make a really big difference when you're talking about being able to access a full 3rd floor. Yarrow Gardens is an example of a 35 right at the line, and their 3rd floors are actually fairly small floor to ceiling, because that 35 doesn't actually really account for like a modern floor to ceiling height. But yeah, I think Jenna's right on about the heat maps. There are definitely areas that are more appropriate than others, but we don't want to get so prescriptive as to say an apartment can only be located on this corner, because everyone's going to have a different vision for the property.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. And once a developer has submitted an offer and it gets into the real meat and potatoes of it, that's one of the first things that they'll want to do is sit down with us and talk about what does this zoning mean for us. And of course, if the charter amendment is not approved, that's also we're going to have to go back to the drawing table and say, what can we do to not only implement the master plan, but also there has to be a feasibility trade-off for the master developer. I mean, I don't know what they're paying, but I'm sure it's going to be a pretty penny. And then there's demo, there's retrofitting, there's all sorts of other infrastructure issues. So it has to pencil out for them or they will walk away and we will end up with a vacant site. And that's kind of the scary part of it. And so we would have to go back to the drawing board at that point and say, okay, what might be feasible? What might work? What might the community support that's still in line with the master plan document?
So based on the surveys that you did this summer, the second one was a lot different than the first one. Did the temperature for passing the charter amendment change between the first and second try? Is it more favorable now than it was in the beginning?
It is. We found that the more you know, the more you're likely to support the charter amendment. Because a lot of people didn't even know, when we started this process, I think it was 15% or something of people didn't even know the hospital was moving. And so some don't, and so they got their signage up there hopefully by now. Wouldn't it be nice to be just turned off from all your electronics for a couple of weeks and not know? As the survey went on, it kept saying, well, did you know this and did you know that? And I think that the more informed people were, the more likely they were to vote in support of it. Because, you know, when you go to the voting booths, you have to be informed. You don't want to just pick one and hope it works out. So we're doing our very best to get the word out through the surveys, through the open houses, through you know, just conversations within the community. And so we'll see what happens. But yeah, it has been more favorable as the more you learn, the more you know, and the more you feel like you can support it according to the surveys.
That's all my questions. Anybody else have a question come up during the okay.
Just
We'll
one
go,
quick one.
Commissioner Gravy.
On the, just out of curiosity, on page 11, when you talk about the section about permitted uses and requirements, and it talks about the concepts from the master plan that are going to try to be incorporated, there's a mention, you know, an eye-catching term about trying to allow retail that doesn't cannibalize existing retail. And I guess I wasn't clear as to, I know that, you know, through this process, you can kind of allow retail and permit it in certain areas, but I didn't think that the city, you know, in this kind of thing could be able to determine what type of retail is going to be where retail is allowed. But that made me wonder if I was mistaken. Does that question make sense?
I'm not sure you're mistaken. We don't get as specific as to say this type of retail is okay, this isn't for the most part. But what we didn't want and what was highlighted in the plan actually several times was there's a lot of existing investment on 38th Avenue at the corners, which is a relatively new development, and then further east. What we don't want is to build a lot more retail and allow it everywhere on the site and then it sits vacant, or it pulls people. There's only so much the market can bear in Wheat Ridge.
Yeah.
And we don't want to have those sites sit vacant either. So I think the goal is to not allow retail everywhere, but still allow it and not get so prescriptive on the exact, is this a bakery or is this an office or?
Yeah,
that
so it's
specific.
more just about how much retail and where it's allowed.
Exactly.
Okay, so I mistook that a little bit. And then the other question I had, just to make sure I understand, when you talk about the significance of the concept plan, once we're at that phase, that's a purely staff process, right? Like, there's not a public input process on the concept plan. Is that correct?
It ultimately is approved by our director, but there is a public process, including a neighborhood meeting requirement
Oh,
and
right,
neighborhood
right.
notification for that. Because we recognize if the zoning is approved and the charter is approved, it might be a couple years before we see a concept plan. And so at the least, it's a courtesy to let people know, hey, there's finally going to be activity and this is what they're proposing. Ultimately, if it complies with the zoning,
Right.
it will get approved, but there's still the opportunity and awareness as part of that neighborhood meeting.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
Who else had a question? Commissioner Kearns?
Okay. Quick one. So, where? Okay. So we talk about tapering heights from 38th Ave with setbacks. Do heights also taper from the Rocky Mountain ditch? And if not, maybe they should.
They don't. There was nothing in the plan that suggested that would be necessary, but noted.
And I think, and I may be remembering this wrong, but I thought in this master plan, there was some language about heights being allowed to be taller next to the ditch. So I'd like to maybe dig a little bit deeper into that.
The ditch is the primary greenway through the site, so let's let more light in. Let's make it less of a canyon and more of a valley, urban form wise. So, and to do that let's taper if possible, just seems more inviting, I think.
No, these are all good recommendations, and even as we delve a little bit deeper into, I mean, we're really just kind of, like we've said, we're talking about big issues at this point, but as we get a little bit deeper into the zoning framework, we're basing it on some of the existing mixed-use platforms, I will call them, in our zoning code. But there may be some other things that we can look into to say, this might be nice if it wasn't 5 stories right next to Lutheran Parkway, or, there might be some additional things that we can look into, including along the ditch.
I guess one more small comment is, you've got Lutheran Parkway and Lutheran Parkway West. Perhaps we should change the name of one of those to avoid confusion.
I agree, but I don't know. It might be up to the developer. And honestly, if the community feels strongly, they might tell us that don't change the name. I don't know.
I vote for Starker Parkway.
You beat me to it. I was going to say Kearns because of that comment.
Yeah, Madam Chair, one more, and it seems to me that education, like you had said, Jana, is very important. Is there a way we can, I don't know what the right word is, manipulate the city website to have like a landing page for this, to get to the main, or the master plan, or maybe be able to put like a link on the city's social media, Lutheran master plan, just not necessarily blast it, but occasionally have something come up, because I think a lot of people don't understand what's happening, and they're making assumptions that the city wants this and they're going to get their way by God. And I don't have a
Yeah.
voice.
Yeah, that's true in every city, and some folks, they're just always going to have that opinion. But I definitely think that we could probably get something out on social media. In fact, I think that we have a plan for that. As part of our timeline of events, I think social was one of them. People can go to the What's Up Wheat Ridge page right now. It's right up front and center, and there's a link right there
Very well.
to the
Yeah.
plan.
You already did it, so never mind.
We've really tried to get the word out in every possible way that we can, and, go ahead.
Yeah, the attendance at the first meeting was great, and the second meeting, we've gotten emails. I talked to someone that lives on Dudley Street that is excited about the requirement to actually have a park on Dudley. So we've talked to hundreds of people at this point in the past couple months.
And the ones you didn't talk to found their way to me, so.
You just,
Okay.
and it's perfectly okay for, tough questions. You can always send them to us too.
All right, thank you for the presentation. That was great. Thank you, Scott. Next on our agenda is upcoming dates.
Okay, so our next regularly scheduled meeting is September 5th. And I don't think we have any items on that one.
No, that one's been canceled.
That one's been canceled. So then the following meeting after that would be September 19th.
And isn't there something happening on the 17th?
The 17th is the open house and the neighborhood meeting. And we've actually got a pretty full week that week. There's also a steering committee meeting for city plan.
Are we allowed to go to the neighborhood meeting? Can the commissioners attend the neighborhood meeting?
Let us know if you plan on attending the neighborhood meeting.
Okay.
I think you'll probably maybe be at the Let's Talk, but I think I would want to,
I live in the neighborhood, so I
yeah,
would like to
that's what
go.
I'm saying. You'd be coming as a resident.
Okay,
I think that's fine, but I want to check with noticing, any specific noticing requirements that we might have to do if more than two of you attend. And please, I'm encouraging more than two of you to attend, that's fine. But because that's also the Let's Talk open house with the city plan stuff. So, but when you get more than two of you, it becomes a meeting if you're in the same room together. So it would, yeah, it would, exactly. It would, it's the appearance of impropriety. Like if you see three of you talking together, and even if you're talking about your kids and your dogs, you just never know. So it's 2x2s is okay. More than that, we have to potentially post a notice. So the open house and the neighborhood meeting. But the neighborhood meeting will most likely have a dedicated room to it at the rec center, probably the activity room. And that's where I could see there being an accumulation of more than two of you in there
Are
potentially.
you talking about the city plan?
I'm talking about both.
Okay.
So we have the zoning, the rezoning neighborhood meeting for the Lutheran site is going to be held at the same night, but in a different location within the rec center.
Okay.
Yep, so
That's on the 17th, like
it's,
4:30
yes,
to
so you can go to
6:30.
both and get, I think we have ice cream that night. So, oh, no. Oh. The residents within 1,000 feet will get notification of that meeting, so.
Just to clarify, then are we canceling the 19th or is that to be determined?
My preference, because of all the night meetings, would be to cancel the 19th. However, if we have a burning hot application, we may have to hold the meeting.
Okay, so open for now.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
open for now.
all right. And now we have project and development updates.
I don't think I have any further updates for today. The medical office building, which is called the MOB, that's moving along. out there next to the hospital. We don't have a final expected CO date on that yet, but we'll let you know when that does. Can you think of anything else?
Yeah, the Outlook Phase 2 apartments at Clear Creek Crossing and the trailhead, which includes a nice statue/wind chime thing, and the picnic shelter is opening later this fall. I believe they're going for final COs in September or October, so coming up pretty soon.
Any commissioner updates?
I don't have an update, but I just wanted to take a minute to thank staff for all their work on this and kind of the continued proactive, really thoughtful approach to these projects that have huge significance to the future of our community. And so I think it seems like we have some really talented staff. So I just wanted to express my appreciation for you all.
Yeah, I'd second that. Thanks for all of the preparation and work. I just want to give a shout out to the people that did the Carnation Festival, the committee and everything. It was outstanding. During the parade, I was next to an older lady that was from Edgewater, and she had said this was her first one, and it was the best parade she's been at in decades. So she was real excited about that. I liked it too. It was, we had some marching bands for change, and it's that old timey feeling. And then over at Anderson Park, whoever picks the bands, oh my God, you did a great job. I can't think there was one that I didn't like. So kudos to the entire festival and everyone that put it on, and thanks to everybody that did.
I did have one more. Don't forget the Boards and Commissions barbecue. Boards and Commissions Appreciation Barbecue on August 28th. This year it's going to be at Prospect Park. There's lots of shade. There's a large shelter there, lots of tables. We'll have Rollin' Smoke is going to cater it. We'll have, I can't remember what the dessert is. Might be ice cream also. Maybe I just have ice cream on the brain. And some games and other activities and live music. So hope to see you there 5:30 to 7:30 on the 28th of August. That's a Wednesday.
Now, can the planning commission sit together, or do we need to break up?
That will be notified. It'll be noticed, so you'll be fine.
All right.
5:30 to 7:30.
All right. May I have any other discussion before we conclude? May I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Madam Chair.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor, raise your right hand. Motion passes. We are adjourned.